Keffe D on trial, the evidence that could finally decide Tupac's murder case. For nearly 3 decades, Tupac Shakur's murder remained one of hip-hop's biggest unanswered questions. But now the question is no longer simply, who killed Tupac? The question has become much more specific. What does the evidence actually prove about Duane Keffe D Davis? Davis is the only person ever charged in connection with Tupac Shakur's murder. And prosecutors have made one thing clear from the beginning. They are not claiming Davis pulled the trigger. Instead, they argue that he helped organize the retaliation that ultimately led to Tupac's death. That distinction could be everything. Because after almost 30 years, the jury isn't being asked to solve every mystery surrounding Tupac. They are being asked whether the evidence proves Davis was responsible beyond a reasonable doubt. And the testimony so far has revealed a case built around old statements, conflicting stories, forensic evidence, and witnesses who sometimes seemed reluctant to talk. So what exactly happened inside the courtroom? Let's break it down. The night everything changed. September 7, 1996. Tupac Shakur was in Las Vegas for the Mike Tyson fight. After the fight, tensions that had been building for months suddenly exploded. Tupac and members of his group encountered Orlando Anderson inside the MGM Grand. Anderson was the nephew of Duane Davis. According to the prosecution, Tupac and others attacked Anderson, and the confrontation was captured on surveillance video. That moment became one of the most important pieces of the prosecution's theory. Because prosecutors argue that what happened inside the MGM Grand wasn't the end of the conflict. It was the beginning of a chain of events that eventually ended with Tupac being shot. The prosecution's argument is straightforward. Davis was angry about what happened to his nephew. He allegedly helped obtain a firearm. He allegedly got into a white Cadillac. And prosecutors say he helped put the people involved in the retaliation into position. Importantly, prosecutors acknowledge that Davis wasn't the person who fired the fatal shots. But they argue that he played a role in setting the events in motion. That is the foundation of their case. And then comes one of their most important pieces of evidence. Davis's own words. The statements that followed Davis for years. One of the unusual aspects of this case is how heavily the prosecution relies on statements Davis allegedly made over the years. According to the prosecution, Davis discussed the events in multiple interviews and other public or recorded statements. The defense, however, has a very different interpretation. They argue that Davis was known to exaggerate. They question whether his statements were accurate. And they argue that there is not enough independent evidence proving that his version of events was truthful. That creates a major problem for the prosecution. Because if Davis's words are central to the case, the jury has to decide. Was he telling the truth or telling stories? That question becomes even more important when looking at the timeline of his statements. In earlier interactions with authorities, Davis allegedly denied involvement in Tupac's murder. In later years, however, prosecutors point to statements they say became increasingly revealing. That evolution is one of the issues the jury must consider. Was Davis changing his story because he knew more than he originally admitted? Or was he simply telling different versions of a story that had become part of his public identity? The defense wants the jury to focus on that uncertainty. And that's where reasonable doubt enters the case. The forensic evidence. But the prosecution doesn't only have Davis's statements. The jury also heard forensic testimony concerning Tupac's death. A medical examiner reviewed the original medical records, photographs, and documentation from 1996 and gave her opinion about the cause and manner of death. Her conclusion was clear. Tupac died from gunshot wounds. And the manner of death was homicide. That evidence doesn't directly identify Davis. But legally, the prosecution first has to establish the basic foundation of the case. Tupac was killed. His death was a homicide. And someone intentionally caused that death. Only after establishing those facts can prosecutors connect the evidence to the person sitting in the courtroom. The defense challenged the reliability of some of the old records. Remember, this investigation goes back almost 30 years. Some of the original material was created using technology from another era. Photographs were limited. Records had to be reviewed decades later.